Drinks, food, art, fun. This is Hops and Spirits Kentucky.
For everyone that was at Railbird Fest this weekend in Lexington, I hope you had a blast. I know I did. I got to go Saturday. Amazing performances. Yes, it was hot, but plenty of shade, plenty of water, and a few good beers and pours were to be had for me. But I hope those that went Sunday had just as good a time. And if you didn't go to Railbird, I hope you still had a great weekend. What's pouring, though? Some news and notes from around Kentucky. Mason, Ohio-based 16 Lots Brewing has officially opened its long-awaited second tap room, this one in Newport on the Levee, up in northern Kentucky. Dubbed the Southern Outpost, the brewery features amenities such as a riverfront patio and cigar speakeasy lounge. The tap room and kitchen hosted its grand opening back in mid-May. The location has a nautical theme and features 2,000 square foot outdoor patio, live music venue, and a full-service restaurant. The spot is open daily for lunch and dinner, and per a Facebook post, they plan to start a brunch service soon. Taco John's will expand its presence in Kentucky and is expected to open in Brandon Crossing between Lexington and Nicholasville this month. The national chain is known for its traditional Mexican food with a twist, with menu items such as street tacos, breakfast burritos, and Mexican donut bites. The location is expected to be one of 5 locations in the Lexington area, according to the Herald Leader. The Midway Bourbon Blues Festival is set for this weekend, June 10th and 11th, in downtown Midway. The festival is a reincarnation of Francisco's Farm Art Fair. The festival is taking the very best artists and craftspeople and pairing them with 2 things Kentuckians love, bourbon and blues. Learn more at midwaykentucky.org. And the Kentucky Craft Bash is coming up on Saturday, June 24th at Louisville's Waterfront Park. The 6th annual bash only pours beers from breweries within the Commonwealth and features more than 50 local breweries and more than 150 beers. For tickets and more info, visit kycraftbash.com. And last but not least, the Belle of Louisville is launching a new On the River cruise series, which allows guests the chance to explore themed content in all the nooks and crannies of the iconic Belle while snacking and sipping your way from deck to deck. Events include Juneteenth on the River on June 16th, Locust Grove on the River on July 28th, Bourbon on the River on September 1st, and Ghost on the River on Friday, October 13th. Spooky, right? There are 2 types of tickets available, the eat and drink tickets and then just drink tickets. All On the River cruise tickets can be purchased at belleoflouisville.org under the special events tab. Up next, though, our Road Trip Series 2023 continues with a trip south down to Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Remember to check out Hops and Spirits on social media at Hops Spirits, all one word, on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Twitter. You can also find Hops and Spirits on YouTube and at hopspirits.com.
Joining us for our Q&A this week, it's not exactly Kentucky, and I'll explain why that is. Welcome in the co-founder and CEO of Chattanooga Whiskey, Tim Piersant.
Hey, Jonathan.
Well, I'm glad to have you back, Tim. It's been a while. I think 2020 was the last time we talked, and I'm guessing some things have changed since then, right?
Yeah, we're no longer in a pandemic, so we'll count our blessings there.
And we'll get into all that. But for those that don't know about you, tell us a little bit about yourself. Not too much, because like I said, I got some good questions to ask here in a second.
Yeah, so my name is Tim Piersant, and founder, CEO of Chattanooga Whiskey. I was born and raised in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So fun fact, I don't know why a lot of people find that surprising. I guess Chattanooga is not the biggest town, but it's not a small town either. So went to Auburn University, met my wife there. We started our lives together back in Chattanooga in 2005. Worked for my dad until I started Chattanooga Whiskey in 2011. And I started with a co-founder. We spent a couple of years having to fight laws to make it legal to distill in Chattanooga. And then a couple of years later, built the first distillery in Chattanooga in 100 years. And now, here we are. We're in a much larger facility now. We have both operating distilleries in downtown Chattanooga. One's our riverfront headquarters, which is where we scale up, all of our recipes that we want to scale from experimental. And this past year, we were named Craft Producer of the Year by Whiskey Magazine at Icons of Whiskey. So that was really cool. It's been a great ride. We just celebrated our 11th founders, our second founders iteration, which was our 11th anniversary. So celebrating 11 years since we launched Chattanooga Whiskey in April of 2012. with an MGP product, mind you, because it was illegal to distill. So yeah, that's our history in a nutshell. I've got a wife and 2 kids, and we love living in downtown Chattanooga and love having both of the distilleries operating in downtown Chattanooga, just as they might have pre-prohibition.
I love that. And see where you live, and if folks, if you haven't been to Chattanooga, highly recommend it, because that's part of the reason I've got you on this one, because it's part of our road trip 2023 series, and we'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. But what made you get into whiskey? Like, what was the driving force? Because the alcohol world is a weird, wild world to get into.
Yeah, in 2011, when my co-founder and I had the idea and posted it on Facebook, it was still, I feel like, before the bourbon boom, but maybe at the beginning. And discovering, it was just, the timing was right, because it was early enough to where not everyone had started drinking bourbon to the degree that it blew up the following years. And so you didn't have really the interest to want to bring distilling back to Chattanooga. And there wasn't the interest to research it and find out either. So, we found all of this rich distilling history in Chattanooga pre-prohibition from approximately 1866 to 1915, when the last distillery shut down because of the onslaught of prohibition in Tennessee, and it was never revived. And I think there just, again, wasn't enough interest to revive it in 2011. And to my knowledge, the couple of people that may have had an interest in distilling in downtown Chattanooga found that it was illegal and didn't pursue a law change, which was a lot more involved than we expected it to be. And so maybe they were the wiser ones to not pursue it, because 2 years into fighting those laws, the fact that it took us nearly that long was pretty surprising, but it was totally worth it, because where we are today, but also it's just a great part of our story.
Well, and I was going to say that, I mean, that is a true part of your story that is amazing, because people probably don't realize, especially if you've gotten into bourbon and you're just kind of enjoying the liquid and maybe not looking at all the history. You might think Tennessee, it would have been legal everywhere. Not quite. Like you can't even go to some of the places that have been there forever and technically have drinks on site.
Right.
So the laws down there were not exactly welcoming for your idea. And why were you willing, though, to fight that? And can you talk a little bit about all that?
Yeah, it was the adventure. It was the history. Revitalizing a unique, rich history that was integral to the community pre-prohibition. Chattanooga is just such a cool town. It's got such a cool folklore about it, and the fact that distilling was, kind of at the epicenter, of Chattanooga, and Chattanooga was at the epicenter of distilling in the Southeast. And to tell that story, a really cool story to be a part of, that revitalization. And we had several people around us that had interest in financially backing us to see this happen. And the changing the laws, it was a conversation with the community, and that was something that my co-founder and I think we were good at. We were good at having a conversation with the community. We were good at telling the story and painting this picture of what we thought Chattanooga whiskey should look like, repackaged, right? Like packaged back into, bringing it back for the first time in 100 years. And social media was at a place where it was very much an open dialogue. It was an open platform. There weren't all the algorithms that there are today that filter the information the way they do today. And back then, when we started, the same night we had the idea, we started a Chattanooga Whiskey Facebook page before we even had a company. And instantly there were hundreds. And then within a week or two, there were thousands of locals just asking questions. We were posting content about bringing it back, and they were wanting to know, they thought it was really cool, and the news got involved, and truly a snowball effect. And that snowball effect carried us through the law change, but it inspired us to sit down with all of the legislators and figure it out. And we found, the good news is that we had the community behind us, and there was a lot of energy there, and that's the energy that kept us going. But there was a lot of pushback from the local legislators. There was no one really knew how to interpret this law, and it was very much buried in 100 years of prohibition, of distilling prohibition in the majority of the 95 counties in Tennessee. And so it required a legislator or a handful of legislators to stick their neck out there and say, yeah, we'd like to see this thing pass, so let's figure it out. And no one really wanted to do that. And so it required us having to, go before the county commission and then form new bills, House Bill 102. Fortunately, there was a legislator that had formed a bill in 2009 where Nashville passed a distilling law, and a handful of other counties, but the majority of the 95 counties did not adopt that bill. And so it made it actually a lot harder for us because those counties intentionally were not a part of that 2009 bill. So we had to rewrite this bill, or write a new bill, House Bill 102, in order to essentially force the hand and not allow individual municipalities to say, I either do want to be a part of this or I don't want to be a part of this. And so we wrote the bill to essentially say that if there's liquor by the drink and if there are packaged retail sales in that respective municipality, then you can also get a license to distill in that municipality. And that changed the laws in the majority of the 95 counties. And that, I think, was what created the real craft distillery boom in the state of Tennessee.
I was going to say, you guys laid a lot of that groundwork, and it's cool to see what's come about it. But was there ever a point where you're like, oh no, maybe we won't get to be in Chattanooga to do this, or have to kind of pivot to a plan B or C?
Yeah, there were a couple of moments for sure. There was a distillery that lobbied against us because there were some other distilleries that were amending our bill to because there were distance requirements between distilleries. And in one particular county, there was a distillery that owned some property right next to another distillery, so they were going to put up some competition, and that distillery didn't want to see it happen, so they got really creative about how to put a stop to us. And by trying to send us to a referendum and basically have people pretend that they were representatives of our distillery. We didn't want to go to a referendum because it would have actually rolled our progress for at least another year, and which would have been exhausting and probably would have killed our momentum. So, and then we would have had to, go to another county nearby to try and make that happen. But it wouldn't have been as authentic. We had to make it happen in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So yeah, there was a legislator that stood in our way because he stood and he was the reason that it didn't pass in 2009 in Chattanooga. And it's crazy. Several years later, there he is still just putting up a fight and for reasons that we didn't think were reasonable. But it took the entire legislative session in order to get it passed through. But again, it was totally worth it because the community fight is turned into what we call whiskey to the people, and whiskey to the people is a unique part of our story. And if there wasn't a fight, if there wasn't a fight with the law, then our story wouldn't be as rich as it is. So it's pretty cool.
I was gonna say, I mean, truthfully, that's the history of alcohol in a sense, and it's even in the modern age, it still can happen. And you, like you mentioned, you've always been up front with pretty much everything, and you mentioned, the early years was MGP, and you could actually get your hand on MGP back then a little easier than you can now. Why were you so upfront about sourcing at a time when maybe not everyone was, and then why retire that 1816 series once everything kind of got up to speed?
The answer to the first question is because we wanted to build a distillery, and we had to tell that story. We had to get the community behind us in order to change the laws, in order to build a distillery. If we didn't want to build a distillery, then, well, it wouldn't have been us, but that would be a reason why someone wouldn't be as transparent about their mission, right? I mean, if the mission is only to sell whiskey and is to do nothing else, well, then yeah, maybe you're incentivized to hide the fact that you don't authentically make it. But that just isn't who we are, and that was never a part of that was never our goal. Our goal was never to just brand. I mean, and also that just doesn't make any sense in my opinion. Like, why would you brand something after a town and just continue to do that and never have any intention of distilling it? Then it'll always be Chattanooga whiskey made in Indiana, and that just and trust me, I mean, there's the questions around that got really old. I mean, it was a daily, even though on a daily basis for years we were telling the story about why it was made in Indiana, and that it is illegal to distill in Chattanooga, and that this is all a mission to change the laws and raise money and build the first distillery in Chattanooga in 100 years. But obviously there's a lot of consumers out there that aren't listening to or necessarily care about those details. And so we received a lot of pushback on a daily basis from locals that just refused to support Chattanooga whiskey until it was made in Chattanooga, which that's okay. And I think we've converted a lot of those people now that it is made in Chattanooga. So the reason that we retired 1816 is because 1816 is not our story. I mean, it was never authentically made by Chattanooga, or authentically made by Chattanooga whiskey in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So it's also a recipe that wasn't our recipe. And when we built the experimental distillery, when we hired Grant McCracken, our now chief product officer and our head distiller at that point, he pushed me to explore recipes to create something that really is uniquely ours. We just spent all this time changing laws and essentially trailblazing, all to what? Just make somebody else's product, utilize somebody else's recipe, piggyback on somebody else's story, which of course there's always going to be some portion of someone's story that you're inspired by, right? I mean, so I'm not going to say that everything is always 100% authentically unique, but we had an opportunity with the experimental distillery with a 100-gallon pot still and 3 100-gallon fermenters and a 100-gallon cooker to really, at relatively low risk, explore lots of different methodologies and recipes in the bourbon making process or in the American whiskey making process. And as we did that, we got 2 years down the road and we had over 100 recipes put away, and we had utilized over 100 different specialty malts. Now, Grant's background being, prolific in beer, he saw an opportunity to utilize specialty malts in American whiskey and in bourbon to the degree that really no distillery ever had before. And so we created our own unique framework that we ended up trademarking called Tennessee High Malt in that process. So everything we did in those first 2 years, and still continue to do to this day, was in that Tennessee High Malt framework. Everything was greater than 25% in specialty malted grains. So pretty quickly, we started making something that was very uniquely ours and very different, even though it carried a lot of it was still bourbon, straight bourbon whiskey by definition, which means that, of course, it was inspired by the straight bourbon whiskey that we were born from, which was 1816, the MGP recipe. It was a lot different than that. And so there was no reason for us to continue the 1816 label. And so when we had 2 successful years at the experimental distillery, we were able to raise the capital to build the Riverfront Distillery, which we went from a 3,000 square foot operating micro distillery, essentially, which we still operate to this day as the experimental distillery, and we built a 50,000 square foot distillery that can produce 40, 50 times what the experimental distillery can do. And we had this barrel cellar of all these really awesome recipes to choose from to scale up to replace 1816. And going through that, like bracketology, going through from 100 barrels down to the final 4, and in the final 4, selecting barrel number 91, that to us, barrel 91, that was it. Like, that was the story, right? That was the news story of authentic Chattanooga whiskey made in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And that is why we rebranded it and called it Chattanooga Whiskey 91.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, when you get down to that many, now when you finally found the one, I think this is one of my favorite stories. You being you and Grant being Grant. Grant didn't want you to touch it too much, right? But you had a different idea. But I think in the end it worked out because you got some pretty good feedback.
Yeah, that is a funny story. It's funny. I often forget about that. Yeah, Grant is, well, Grant's an artist, right? And we have a lot of artists here at Chattanooga Whiskey that are a huge part of our creative process. And I'd like to consider myself one of those as well. And a true artist's work is never complete, right? It's never done. And in Grant's defense, he's in the process of making this beautiful artwork, and I'm trying to rush it to market because I think it's ready to go. And I don't know that, I'm not sure with Grant, it would have ever necessarily been ready to go. There was never going to be a perfect time for that, right? We weren't trying to be the perfect picture of Tennessee whiskey or straight bourbon whiskey in that, it has to be corn, rye, barley, and it has to be aged, 4 to 6 years. Again, we crafted something that no one's ever seen before, really. Within, again, obviously, there shares a lot of commonality. So we are targeting a bourbon audience, but we're targeting a bourbon audience with something that the bourbon audience has never heard of, called Tennessee High Malt. So to me, it's like, look, one of our slogans is change the rules. We've always changed the rules. We changed the rules again with Tennessee High Malt, and we should change the rules again with when we decide our product is ready to go to market. So yeah, I started taking samples of 91 and mainly 91 and some other recipes, but that was 80% of what we were producing at Riverfront. And I was pulling samples at 8 months, 10 months, 12 months, 14 months, just constantly pulling samples. And when it hit like 18, 19 months, there was definitely a holy cow moment for me. And I just thought it was incredible. And I started blind tasting, really well-known chefs in town and bartenders in town and people that are known to have respectable palates. And I would blind taste them on with stuff that I know that they really like. It could be like Four Roses single barrel, or it could be Blanton's, or Weller 12 or whatever. I took all these like popular products, and I would put them in a blind against an 18-month Chattanooga Whiskey 91 at the time, and I would have them essentially rank and guess the age and guess the proof. And at that it was barrel strength. It wasn't at 91 proof. It was at like 100 and probably 118, 119 proof. Our barrel entry is 115, but it goes up here at the distillery in proof. So I probably did this 100 times. And Grant, I didn't tell Grant until probably after 90 of them, and I had all this data, and I even had one of the top chefs in Chattanooga come to the distillery and do this blind in front of Grant, which was painstaking. And Grant was just cringing, waiting for him to say, "Man, this crap's, it's 18, or this is really young and really hot. It's not ready to go, and I don't know what this is, but it sucks." And for the 100th time, right in front of Grant, he goes, "This is number one out of like 5 blinds with some amazing products in there that some of them were 10, 12 plus years old, and it was 91 that he chose, and he guessed that it was 8 plus years old, and it was 18 months old, and he guessed that it was less than 100 proof, and it was 118 proof." And I was like, "Grant, this stuff's ready to go." Which, of course, it didn't graduate to straight bourbon whiskey until it's 24 months old. And so we didn't release it until I think it was about 26 or 27 months. But we just said, screw it, like this product is ready. And to Grant's dismay, that blind tasting pushed us to release a product that is now still less than 91 anyways. We have products that are north of 4, 5, 6 years old, but 91 is still less than 3 years old. It has matured a little bit. It's maybe 2.5, a little north 2.5, but still less than 3, and is kicking ass and taking names. So and we've, at that point, I think we were we were 15,000, 16, 17,000 6-pack case company, and now we're north of 50,000. So with that product. So, and we went from an 1816 that got upwards of 10 years old, and now we released a Vote whiskey at 12 years, but that was only 4 single barrels. But we were selling that product at north of 8 years old. I think it was pushing 10 at one point. We put it actually in the Solera barrel at 10 years old. So yeah, it was pushing 10 years old, and we went from that to a 2.5-year 91 from a 10-year traditional 75 corn, 21 rye, 4% malted barley, MGP, which now people rave about, to a 2.5-year 91. And, we've tripled, quadrupled our sales. So
I think you did something right, because it's one of my favorites. It's one that stays on my shelf pretty consistently. Maybe not the 91 as much as the Cask 111, but both are great. And when it's, you have stuff like that, how fun is it then to kind of build out? Because like you mentioned, you got the Founders, the 11th anniversary blend, which is the past, present, and future. That kind of blends all those together. You've added the bottled and bond, the rye, and things like that. How's it been to add on as well?
Yeah, so I'll give Grant a lot of credit here too, because he came to me pretty early on and said, "Hey, let's scale a lot of recipes." At first, we only scaled 91, and then we were kind of trying to be selective about another recipe to scale. I think we had chosen our rye, for example, like which was the seventh. Was it the seventh release? Yeah, it was the seventh. It was batch 007 out of the experimental distillery, and it did well, and we really liked that product. It was a malted rye, of course, again in the Tennessee high malt style, and so that felt like a natural add-on to within our flagships, having 91 and then a unfiltered cask forward version of 91, which we call cask 111, and then added the recipe 99 rye. We really liked our batch 008 out of the experimental distillery, which was a single malt, and so we scaled that one as well. But then Grant came to me and he was like, let's scale all the first 10 releases out of the experimental distillery. And I'm like, I mean, that sounds kind of reckless. I'm not sure, like we don't know if we have market demand for all these things, but I trusted them, and I do trust them. And so we did it. And then, and then after that, God, I don't know. We scaled probably like 36 more recipes from it, and at the time you're thinking, what are we going to do with all these products? And now, I guess so. We established experimental and began distilling in 2015. So that was 8 years ago, and we established Riverfront in 2017. So 6 years ago. It's 6 years later. The blends that we have come out with, we could have never done if we didn't scale all these recipes. It has given us so much creative power and flexibility that I think that really celebrates not just Chattanooga Whiskey's innovation, ability to innovate, but it gives our style of whiskey, our style of bourbon, Tennessee high malt, it gives it a lot more credibility because you can do so much with it. And again, being greater than 25% in specialty malts in all of our recipes, so upwards of 100%. Like our Infinity Solera barrel, that's one of the 3 barrels that we use to blend Founders with. That's made up of 16 different recipes that are all straight malt recipes. That whole barrel is straight malt. So, coming out with a bottled and bond that has 2 vintages per year, and each vintage is a new evolution with, you adding or subtracting a different high malt recipe in there, is something that no one else is doing. There's not a bottled and bond that is as complex as our bottled and bond, because of what we've been able to do with scaling all of these different recipes and then being able to blend. So, we have a distilling team of 15, and in that distilling team, I would say at least 5, maybe 6 of those distillers are members of our R&D team, and they all have specialties within R&D department. They've got, some of them just focus on blending, some of them just focus on recipe development at experimental, some of them just focus on recipe development at Riverfront. So there's just so much you can do with all of these recipes. And I think when you look at the release of Founders and how complex it is between these 3 Solera barrels and what goes into those 3 Solera barrels. When you look at, just 91 is a blend of different toasts and chars in a 4,000 gallon white oak Solera barrel. When you look at our barrel finishing series, which is a unique release every year, the first one was Tawny Port. The second one was Scotch Cask. The third one was Silver Oak Cabernet. All 3 of those were not our flagship recipe. All 3 of those might have had 91 in it, but they were a blend of lots of different recipes. And like Silver Oak was a blend of 5 different single malt recipes. I think Tawny Port had 6 different recipes in it. So the innovation that has come even out of, I mean, at first in my mind, it's like, okay, we're building a big craft distillery that can produce north of 2,000 barrels a year, 3,000 barrels a year. Right now we're at 2,000, but it has the capability of pushing 3,000+. It's kind of like, all right, you're just scaling your flagships, but we have managed to turn this place into its own innovative hub, and that has created some, well, honestly, it's kept the energy alive. It's kept the momentum alive. It's kept the energy alive, and it's one of the reasons that I think we earned Craft Producer of the Year from Whiskey Magazine.
I was going to say, you guys have always made amazing products, and when you have folks like Grant, who's now, kind of taken that, gone from head distiller to now just chief product officer, and you've added Tiana to being the head distiller. What's it like to have folks like that, like you said, come to you with actual different ideas that you may not have thought of, but 3-4 years down the road, you're like, I'm so thankful you did.
I think the creativity of our team is absolutely the power of our team, without question. And they are passionate about Chattanooga whiskey. And the reason that they are passionate about Chattanooga whiskey is because they are creating it. And we listen to them. We listen to their ideas. And really, it's the leadership's job to make sure that we can channel these ideas and bring them to market in a way that isn't, or bring them to market in a way that is Chattanooga whiskey, right? And I think our leadership team has done that very well, and that has allowed a ton of creative freedom within these walls and within what we call Tennessee high malt. Because again, we're not subjecting ourselves to a style or a category that is super, I mean, it is regimented or is structured, but it does have structure around it. But we've allowed ourselves to be a lot more free within that, within the confines of American whiskey or the confines of straight bourbon. And in Tennessee high malt, again, not just calling ourselves Tennessee whiskey and just doing a Lincoln County process filtration, right, on a traditional mash bill, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And again, it has paved the way for, people like us to be inspired by that and then create our own unique thing off of a demand that has been created around that product. But yeah, I mean, we wouldn't be where we are without Grant and Tiana, and with that, we've got 40 employees at Chattanooga Whiskey, and I think being in Chattanooga, Tennessee has helped a lot. It is a very creative town, and it's in a great part of the country, and I think it's with the outdoors especially, you have a lot of creatives that are drawn to the outdoors, and of course, craft beverage is cool, and it's a cool thing to be a part of, and we have managed to create a very innovative product within a traditional industry, and our creative people have had everything to do with that, and they are passionate about what they create. And so, I mean, specifically, like if we're just talking Grant and Tiana, there's a lot of other people I could talk about, but I mean, Grant is, he's got a really cool story, and I mean, coming out of college, out of Indiana, ironically, and going into business consulting, and then saying, I hate this, and just deciding that he wanted to be a brewer, and he was a home brewer, and became a head brewer for a really prominent brewery, one of the, I would say, maybe the most the most well-known craft brewery in the world, and being a big part of their innovation and then beginning to distill at home, and then being able to take some of those, those creative recipes and distill those recipes, and saw an opportunity to pave a path in distilling that perhaps had already been paved in brewing, right? So, and that obviously it really takes a creative genius to be able to see that opportunity and to uproot your life in the Northeast and come down to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and where absolutely no one, and we hadn't even built a distillery yet. It was just an idea at that time, right? So I mean, that's a huge risk to take on his part.
Yeah.
And then Tiana did the same. I mean, Tiana, in her own unique way, I mean, she uprooted her life in California and came to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where she knew no one. And it is a jewelry maker, right? I mean, she makes this beautiful jewelry, and as a craftsman and was already a craftsman, and was already an artist, and has an amazing ability to take her skill set and plug that into to even now large scale production, right? Because that's really hard to do. It's hard when if you're a craftsman or you're a tinkerer, and to be able to scale that, I think that requires a lot of discipline. And that is what is also unique about those two. They have the ability to be craftsmen, but they also have the discipline in order to scale it. And that is what I'm super thankful for.
I was going to say, it's led to some amazing products. Like I said, the Cask 111 is one of my favorites. I really have enjoyed a few pours out of this bad boy the other night. It's a unique blend, and I guess for my last question, because I think we've talked about what's next. You guys have got some fun recipes in store, and you're always doing new things. But this is the road trip series, and you're on the Kentucky podcast. Road trip down to Chattanooga. What can folks do? What can folks expect? What should folks do?
Well, they should definitely come and tour the Chattanooga Whiskey Experimental Distillery at 1439 Market Street. It is on TripAdvisor. It is one of the top tourist attractions in all of Chattanooga, which has a lot of really great tourist attractions that are family friendly. We are, of course, 21 and up. But we operate 7 days a week there. We have now produced north of 450 experimental barrels, which we call it the only standalone experimental whiskey distillery in the United States for that reason. And we do tours every hour on the hour. We have a flight of whiskeys that is second to none, that includes product that is exclusively distilled and poured there at the experimental distillery. You can only purchase experimental labels at the experimental distillery, but we also showcase our flagships there as well. The Riverfront Distillery is not open for tours. At some point, maybe in the future, it will be, but I would highly encourage scoping out the experimental distillery, which you can reserve online, your tours online. The experimental distillery is in the south side of Chattanooga. The south side is where I live. It is the food and bev hub of Chattanooga. So when you're at the experimental distillery, either before or after, you can walk to any number of fantastic, locally owned, great craft restaurants, and have great cocktails or great food. And then, of course, we're surrounded by mountains. So you can go up to Rock City, Ruby Falls. You can go to the aquarium. We have one of the best aquariums in the country on the Tennessee riverfront. There's a lot to do here. It's a great town. And it's a little hot in the summertime. We are in Southeast Tennessee. But for me, it's great because it ages our whiskey. So, but yeah, definitely encourage everybody to come and check us out and get on our website, explore our website. And you can also book your tours on ChattanoogaWhiskey.com as well.
I was going to say, we're used to that here in Kentucky. I think this weekend it's supposed to hit 91. I'll be out at a music festival, and I'll be drinking as much water as humanly possible. So I understand the heat, and And Tim, thanks for sharing the story. Some good pours as well from Chattanooga Whiskey. And like I said, folks, if you haven't yet, try it. And if you can get down to Chattanooga, I also recommend that as well.
Thanks, Jonathan. I appreciate you having me on.
Find more from Hops and Spirits at hopspirits.com.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.